Hi, Bhavna. How are you? Of course, I picked you right when you're picking up your coffee. That's, of course,
I
classic.
figured, I figured I'd be informal with coffee, keep myself warm as the weather's starting to get cold.
It is starting to get cold, even in California, right?
It is, yes.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Well, Bhavna, how are you this afternoon?
doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this.
I am so excited to speak with you today. And just for folks listening, we are here today with Bhavna Dias, who is a OMAS advocate. She focuses on awareness, but you also have a very compelling professional career with the University of California, Los Angeles. I'm really excited to talk to you about all of this. So thank you once again for spending some time with us today.
Of course.
Um, like most of the folks that we have spoken to, Bhavna, your interaction and your affiliation with OMAS is extremely personal. Um, you know, you and I had talked a little bit before about Amara, your daughter, and her diagnosis. But can you talk a little bit more about that and sort of your overall motivation for why you chose to advocate for this very rare condition?
Sure. So my daughter Amara, when she was just shy of 18 months old, started to have a bit of a tremor in
Hmm.
one of her legs. And we took her to the neurology department, the ER, and they checked her out and essentially sent us back home. They did a bunch of tests, bunch of blood draws, and sent us back home, saying it should be fine. Come back
Mm,
if there's any issues.
sure.
The next day, her tremor actually moved from her left leg to her left arm, so she
Oh,
was
wow.
completely tremoring, and she wasn't able to move from sitting to standing or standing to sitting. Now she was 17 months, so she was fully walking,
Sure.
talking, all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so we took her to the ER and we got admitted at UCLA. And we were admitted for about a week and they
Hmm.
did a number of tests. They did
Mm.
EEGs and blood draws and MRIs and so many different things. And every single test came back negative.
Wow.
So after about a week, and in that week, she had deteriorated from being able to walk, sort of,
Hmm.
to not being able to walk anymore. She would just kind of like stumble, and she needed support to walk. And her sleep just kept deteriorating.
Okay.
And we were discharged, saying we have no idea. The doctor said
Wow.
we have no
Yeah.
idea. Most likely, they gave us a diagnosis, which a lot of OMAS kids get actually, called acute cerebellar ataxia, which is sort of like a catch-all diagnosis for, there's a paralysis and it's probably viral, but we haven't identified any viruses, and so just time will heal all. Just
Wait
go
and see. Yeah.
wait
Wait
and
and see.
see,
Yeah.
and just go home. So after a week of being in the hospital, where literally every night was horrible because Amara
Right.
was just not sleeping, we ended up getting discharged with no answers except this diagnosis we had not heard of before,
Right.
and we're told to go home and just wait and see. It
Wait it
might
out.
get worse,
Yeah.
but it might get better. And we came home and we're waiting to understand what it might get better looked like. But that night, actually, Amara developed this odd eye movement, erratic eye movement, which we came to know as opsoclonus.
Opsoclonus. Yeah.
It's a very distinct eye movement, and specialists would know that one different from another kind of eye movement called nystagmus or saccades. It's very, very distinct.
Hmm.
But we called the hospital and we said, there's this weird eye movement now that started. What do we do? Do we come back? And they said it doesn't change your diagnosis. But in actuality, it absolutely does change the
Yeah.
diagnosis to be
Absolutely. Yeah.
everything. So we were home for a few days, and Amara kept getting worse.
Hmm.
She was just not able to sleep. Her myoclonus, which is kind of muscle jerks,
Yep.
would keep her up at night. The only way she would sleep is if one of us was kind of holding her
Holding
tight.
her. Yeah.
So none of us were sleeping. Like my husband and I were not sleeping at all.
Can
And
imagine.
we ended up taking her back in. Basically, I decided, if she doesn't sleep a wink tonight, we're going to go back in.
Right.
And by that point, we had been, down the Google wormhole of searches.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
What's wrong with my baby? And of course,
Yeah.
trying to parse through all the noise out there of like
Hmm.
all these things are probably wrong with your child. We came upon another family's story out of Boston, actually,
Hmm.
um, on OMAS.
Hmm.
And there's like all these text exchanges between my husband and I, because one of us would be with Amara at night texting the other one, who would be kind of like doing the dishes or looking at insurance or whatever,
Sure.
that this might be it, but we really hope this isn't it, because that means there's most likely a tumor.
Right.
Um,
You get an answer to a whole new set of questions.
right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's ultra
and concerns.
rare.
Yeah.
Right. And so we ended up taking her back into the hospital, fearing that this would be OMAS. And then we went in, I remember the date exactly, April 9th, 2021, back into the hospital, and we were given a diagnosis of OMS. We were very lucky in the sense that we had a neurologist from Japan who had studied OMS in Japan and was familiar with a lot of the research, because it's so rare.
Absolutely.
It's
hard to,
Gosh, find someone
what are the odds? That's crazy. Yeah.
So we were diagnosed upon that second admission, and she started getting treatment for OMAS, but she wasn't getting better. Mm-hmm. And we had an ultrasound done, we had an MRI done, and all of those came back negative, saying she has no tumor.
I was going to say, at this point, they still haven't found a tumor, right?
They still haven't found a tumor, so they're thinking that it's maybe viral, maybe she got sick. But, we were still following COVID protocols at that time, so there was no chance that she was sick. Like, there were no symptoms, there was no exposure.
Right.
And so ultimately then on the, a couple weeks later, they decided to do one last test, and that was a radioactive isotope nuclear scan called the MIBG.
Wow.
And that identified a tumor behind her liver. And it was an interesting moment for my husband and I, because that whole period of time, that entire month of just not knowing what was going on.
They say the diagnostic odyssey of a month, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And, in retrospect now, I mean, we were one of the lucky ones that's considered quick diagnosis. Some people are waiting 3, 4, 5 months at least for a diagnosis. And we were just trying to go back on behaviors. Like, okay, we took Amara for a walk and she pet a cat, and was she exposed to a disease?
Yeah, some sort of weird feline thing. Yeah,
right, exactly. Yeah, and we were just like, okay, well,
you're just grasping. Yeah,
right. Did we overcompensate with COVID protocols? Is she, is her immune system so bad that we didn't, protect?
Well, and we knew so little about COVID too. Like, you didn't know if you get some really ultra rare strain of COVID or yeah,
exactly. Did she have COVID before COVID was even a thing? I mean, we were just going down this, like, what did we do as parents, right? What happens with a lot of parents. And so in a weird way, when the tumor diagnosis happened, we were devastated, but also relieved that it wasn't our fault, in this really strange way.
No, I can understand. Yeah.
We're like, okay, let's celebrate. It's a tumor. We've identified the cause, and now we have to be parents of a child with cancer.
It's so interesting how you say that, like, you're celebrating the fact that you got to an answer, which is not a great answer at all. Right. Now you have a child with cancer, to your point, and a whole other cavalcade of emotions and other things kick off from there. Right. Yeah,
exactly. And so then, that happened on a Thursday. We were scheduled for surgery on that Monday. And I mean, at this point, there's videos and everything online. I mean, Amara was in such a vegetative state. She was not able to communicate at all. She was not able to even hold her neck up. Like, she was pretty much like a newborn baby.
Right. At 18 months old. Yeah.
18 months old. Had to be held. She was only able to eat like pureed foods because she wasn't able to swallow. So,
yeah.
I mean, we were just like, do anything to make her better,
Right.
Surgery was scheduled for Monday. It was supposed to be a 4-hour surgery. We were told that the tumor was actually in a complex spot tucked behind her liver.
But anytime you think about the liver, it's such a vital organ, right? Going anywhere near that is got to be unbelievably nerve-wracking.
Right, exactly. And so they had to fly in a liver specialist, a liver transplant specialist, to help in case they needed to kind of mobilize the liver to access the tumor. Plus, it was right next to arterial blood vessels. And so we needed to give consent for blood transfusions. I mean, it was like a scary, scary thing for parents, right?
Unbelievable.
Anyway, so the tumor was resected. And then we were sort of on this road of, okay, now we have two things. We have the neuroblastoma cancer journey. And what does that look like? It took a while for them to even stage our cancer as whether it's low risk, intermediate risk, or high risk.
Sure.
Intermediate risk. And then there's this autoimmune OMAS, which, for people that don't know, the easiest way I can explain it is basically she had a tumor that was building in her for who knows how long.
Long time. Yeah. Because of the autoimmune issue, right?
Well, actually, the tumor probably showed up first.
Oh, really? Okay.
And what happened was it grew and grew and grew. And neuroblastoma typically is a very rapidly growing tumor.
Right.
And most people don't get diagnosed with a neuroblastoma until it's like stage 3 or 4.
Mm.
And it's a pretty lethal cancer for children. And
they
so
hadn't staged her quite yet, you said,
they
right?
hadn't quite staged her yet because there was a lot of complications. It's the age of diagnosis.
A lot of moving parts. Yeah.
Tumor biopsies that they had to do. But essentially what happened was, so she had this tumor and then it was growing. And when it got to a sizable, the assumption is that when it got to a sizable amount, like
mass,
mass,
yeah,
her immune system decided to start attacking the tumor as a foreign object in her body. But her B cells were misguided, and because it's nerve tissues in a way, it's neuroblastoma, started attacking her cerebellum as well, and other parts of the brain.
Sure. And the body literally turning against itself.
Exactly. Okay, maybe the brain is part of the problem or is part of the tumor, and started attacking her brain. So literally making her lose all of her motor functions.
Right. The swallowing, everything. Yeah.
And we could still tell, I mean, she still seemed like it was her under there, but not her really.
But very buried. Yeah. Very hidden.
Very buried. And that was one of the key things for diagnosis too, is that, I had one family friend that helped from Rhode Island that said that, the key diagnostic factor is that the behavior of the child, like the personality completely changes. And that's the difference between acute cerebellar ataxia and
OMAS.
OMAS is that the eyes movements are pretty erratic and very distinct, but also your child is not your child anymore.
Right.
Very, very different. Anyway, so when the tumor was resected, it was a very, very scary surgery, but was successful. They actually identified a second mass behind the primary mass.
Wow.
It's like 2 tumors of the same sort. And then after that, needed to start her recovery, waiting to figure out if she needed chemo, which she didn't. But in the meantime, we were still treating her for the OMAS, which was immune suppression. So every 4 weeks, she was getting donor antibodies, immunoglobulins, steroid infusions every month, and also something called rituximab, which destroys the plasma B cells so that they can regenerate and hopefully they're not misguided anymore. So we were on that journey for 20 months.
Wow.
She celebrated her 3rd birthday. So it took her until her 2nd birthday to start walking again.
Unbelievable.
But then it was like this, she started walking, and she had to relearn everything. She had to relearn how to crawl, how to climb onto a couch.
Yeah, it's like somebody just pushed the reset button on her, right? Yeah,
exactly. We were in occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. And then it sort of just came back. She started walking one day. She started talking, and it was just like, having your child.
That must have floored you. Yeah.
And I think to come back to your original question is like, how did we get involved in this whole thing? Whole story, but also I feel like are one of the lucky ones in that our treatment journey was only 20 months. A lot of families are still in treatment 4 years later. And we felt like, you think about, why did this happen to me when Amara got sick? It was like my first time being a parent. Why is this my motherhood journey while my friends are able to just take their kids to the zoo
and hang out and do fun things? Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to hold my kid in the middle of the night and
try to help her sleep. But
right. Yeah. And you never really know why things happen the way they do to anybody. But after she got better, we realized, okay, it's because we need to help. We need to stay involved.
Yep.
She got better so that we then now have capacity to help other families.
Help others. Yeah. That's a beautiful sentiment, Bhavna. One of the things that I've been thinking about as you've been telling this very heart-wrenching yet fascinating story is you could have tapped out right after she got into the remissive state that she's in today. You didn't, right? You said, this has changed my whole thought process here. You're moving into advocacy, or you have moved into advocacy, but you still have the challenges associated with Amara. I mean, I know she's not out of the woods, right? So how are you kind of balancing those emotional and physical demands of being Amara's caregiver, but also being the stalwart advocate that you are, and you and your husband are together?
Right. I mean, it's very tough. I would say, I'd be lying if I said I'm really great at self-care. I'm not.
Right. I bet. Yeah.
It's a journey. I
Mhm.
think it's essentially kind of just understanding that it is exhausting, and to
Yeah.
kind of just, my husband keeps reminding me that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like, I
Right.
want everything to happen today. And we are in this for the long haul. We're
Yeah.
in this for the next, 20, 30 years of advocating for a cure and all of that. And so I
Sure.
think, it's kind of, we complement each other well that way. And also just connecting to the community of OMAS caregivers.
Mm.
There's an anecdote of, when we were in the trenches with Amara, um, I just felt completely alone. Like, we had a great network of friends that showed up for us and
Sure.
family. And I'll talk more about that later if it makes sense. But we also felt completely isolated because we didn't have anybody that understood what we were going through
Sure. Yeah.
collectively,
Yeah.
right?
Not certainly not
Right.
entirely, right?
Right.
Maybe
Like, they were
peripherally or yeah. Yeah.
right. They
Yeah.
were sympathetic, they were supportive.
Sure.
They couldn't be empathetic necessarily. They hadn't
Sure.
gone through it. And when I discovered the OMAS community on Facebook and kind of connected with some moms, there were a couple of moms from Michigan actually that were very good about reaching out to me with just the odd messages here and there on,
Yeah.
like,
Just
"How are you doing
checking
this
in.
and that?"
Yeah.
And I scheduled a call with one of them actually after a few months, and we talked for an hour and a half. Like, it was like we were old friends
Yeah.
that, had no like, just the connection, the
Right.
craving of wanting somebody else that understood
Understood where
everything.
you were coming from, right? To have even this thing that is as tragic as it is, but to have that in common and have that as the
Right,
thing that allows the trench.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crying together, laughing
Yeah.
together, kind of frustrating together. So I think that helps a lot to just kind of have a connection to a
Mhm.
community, even if we don't speak that often.
Sure.
Um, and just knowing that there's a reason Amara is better. So I think, like,
Right.
leaning into gratitude has really helped as well.
Mhm.
Just
Mhm.
every time we get frustrated about, behavioral therapy or physical therapy, or Amara is still lagging on this or that, or insurance is, kind of a pain in the pain.
Being yeah,
Um,
being less than helpful.
or so complicated for no reason.
Yeah.
We kind of try to lean into gratitude. We are in a really
Yeah.
good place with Amara right now, and we're lucky.
Yeah. Talk
Yeah.
to me a little bit more about the OMAS community. You mentioned these women in Michigan, the Facebook group. Obviously, OMS Life exists. Have you attended the major events that are done? I know there's some that have been done in the Los Angeles area. Have you leaned into that community as well, Bhavna?
Yeah, so I work closely with OMS Life Foundation,
Mhm.
and Mike, the founder of it. And I had the privilege of being invited to attend the provider conference that took place in England
Oh, yes.
in 2022.
Right. And there's another one coming up again, right?
And there's another one coming up in
Yeah.
March, which I'll be
Mhm.
going to as well, because I'm now part of the OMS steering committee, the international steering committee. But yeah, I think for me, it was okay. I spent a lot of time when Amara was in the hospital. I mean, we were in the hospital for 45 days straight.
Wow.
And at night, my husband would be rocking Amara to sleep, and I'd be on my laptop at 3 in the morning reading every single article I could
And you
find on
did just fine,
PubMed,
right? Yeah, just
right, about
climbing
OMS,
through everything. Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
that was published about OMS or Opsoclonus or anything. And I mean, I spent so much time reading journal articles that I was literally asking the doctors, like, what about that one study from X country in 2000? And they were like, yeah, we read that. Stop. Like, just let us know. And I felt like, okay, well, I had the ability and the capacity based on my training and all of that to read journal articles and understand what to get from it. But not every caregiver has the ability or the time or, the capacity to do that. And so can I
Right.
use my skills to maybe help curate the articles and do
Sure. Why not?
summaries for
Yeah.
other families? And so that kind of led me to finding the OMS Life Foundation and connecting with Mike and just saying, like, hey, I want to offer my services in whatever way we need.
Mhm.
And let's, it's been helpful to do that. So we have a conference coming up for the caregivers in Los Angeles in October of next year.
Yes.
And my husband and I are going to help organize some events as well for that. We're excited.
That's outstanding.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about you as a professional,
Mhm.
Bhavna, because you mentioned like, oh, leaning into your skills and some of the things that you were able to do around research and article curation. Would you mind talking a little bit about what you do professionally?
Sure. Right now, I am the executive director of the Center for Social Impact at UCLA.
Mhm.
My training, my background is actually in public health. So I spent a number of years working in public health and doing a lot of evidence-informed decision-making work for the health department in Toronto. And so a lot of my training is in appraising evidence and research and
Sure.
kind of essentially coming up with practice guidelines based on literature. So I think that was generally what led me to be the caregiver that wanted all the information that was out there versus my husband was like, tell me what I need to know and don't tell
Yeah.
me anymore,
Give me the highlights.
Yeah, don't
Give me the
take me
need to
down
know.
this wormhole.
Yeah.
You're on your own down this wormhole. But so for me, I think it's the advocacy piece is just built into my background.
Into your DNA. Yeah. Yeah.
In public health, a lot of what I did was policy work, advocating for health improvement policies. So now thinking through the environmental supports for rare disease advocacy, things like recently I attended a conference hosted by the NORD Association.
Oh, sure. Nord. Yep.
Rare disease advocacy group. And they held a caregiver conference in Los Angeles. And I got to know that there was an effort to advocate for the establishment of a rare disease advisory council in California.
Wow.
So 28 states in the country currently have these things called RDACs.
Okay.
To help the state understand the needs of the rare disease community and how to advocate for that. But California didn't have one. As progressive as California is, we were missing one. And so just being able to advocate on that behalf is something that I did. And I'm happy to say that it was just passed in October into law. So California will be establishing an RDAC as well. And I hope to get involved in that.
Oh, wow. That's outstanding. Yeah.
I think just kind of thinking through all the different.
Well, you would be a huge benefit to that organization. I mean,
thank you.
Yeah.
I hope that there's some good work that can come out of it. But I think like the public health training has really kind of been helpful in thinking through, okay, there's policy supports needed. There's environmental supports needed. What kind of guidelines can we create for hospitals or, child life specialists about OMS?
Community service organizations.
Exactly. Yeah. Community engagement and mobilization, support for the caregivers. So I think it's essentially what OMS Life has been doing for the last 12 years.
Sure.
But, kind of that's just sort of the way my brain works. And it's see that there's other people that are involved in that as well.
And I'm smiling because, as you know, you and I have similar backgrounds. I went through the MPH journey. I teach public health at a university. So, I love what you and I could just geek out on public health. Right? Of course. A whole separate conversation around that. Bhavna, as you think a little bit about, clearly there's advocates like you and Mike and people pushing hard OMS Life, but there's still so much that people don't know or understand about OMAS or just unique challenges of rare diseases in general as a caregiver, as a mom, as an advocate. What are some of the things you wish people understood more about some of these unique challenges as it pertains to managing someone with a rare neurological disorder or cancer? Talk to me a little bit about your sort of wish list, I guess, if you have one.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think the hardest thing is that, there's more and more information coming out about a rare disease like OMAS, which is ultra rare. So the definition, I think the statistic is like 1 in 10 million.
Yeah, that's so rare. Yeah.
OMAS, so it's ultra rare around the world. So there's more information coming out, but there's still so little that we actually know about it. And I think that's really, really tough because, for instance, now that we're out of the dark days and, in remission, there's still the potential for relapse. Of course. And, our specialist, our OMS specialist said that she hasn't seen a single person not relapse yet at some point in their lives.
That's hard to hear.
That's scary, right? Because you're now trying to experience the joys of having your child functional again. With this mindset of like, okay, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, and when is that going to happen, and how do I brace myself for that? So I think it's, there was such a strong community that showed up for us when we were in the hospital, when we were going through it. And I think as any kind of trauma or crisis, people kind of then move on with their lives and things happen. And I think one of the things—
Life doesn't stop moving.
Life doesn't stop moving. But I think for rare disease families, there's a constant worry and fear, and there's work to be done.
Sure.
In terms of behavioral therapy or sleep therapy or, a whole bunch of complications that the pathway isn't clear. I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing is that even the best health systems in the world have flaws. I mean,
Sure.
we experienced some of the most incredible providers that supported us, that were just, on top of it for us and just made us feel completely at home.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's such an ultra rare disease that the protocols were complex. And
Sure.
it was us remembering, okay, no, this is
Mhm.
the level at which she titrates for her infusions.
Yeah.
This is her dose. She can't have that. She has a, um, paradoxical reaction to Benadryl. So she has to have Zyrtec instead. Like, just all of the details that need to be maintained, I think is,
Right.
there isn't like just a systematic protocol that
Yeah.
provides
I was
familiar
gonna say, you're saying the protocols are complex or don't exist at all,
or don't
right?
exist, and you're kind of
Yeah.
figuring it out and you're
Right.
testing it, and then you're grabbing an anecdote from another family member saying, oh, you know what, if she has these results with her IVIG, maybe try a different brand of IVIG. I mean,
Right.
that's not something the nurses or the doctors are thinking about,
Right.
right? So
Right.
that's a personal advocacy. So it's, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that there's still so little information, and I think it
Yeah.
would be fantastic to fund more with regards to children's diseases, like
Mhm.
even childhood cancer, for instance, which
Mhm.
there's a lot of advocacy groups about. There's a lot of
Sure.
organizations
Sure.
focused on that, but only 4% of federal funding
Goes towards that.
researching childhood cancers.
Yeah.
And it's the number one killer of children outside
Sure.
of accidents, right?
Sure.
So that dichotomy right there is important for people to realize. And you tend not to think about it unless you have a child or somebody that that's affected by it, because most children, thankfully, are healthy.
Right.
Um, and then it's the rare families that have to go through this that start to become aware of all this. So I don't know if there's one single thing, but I think just kind of
Right.
understanding it's sort of like the battles continue for a lot of
Mhm.
families,
Mhm.
and we need a lot of allies with families that have the capacity, right? That aren't juggling insurance claims and this and that,
Right.
to advocate for us on her
Right.
behalf.
On your behalf.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you mentioned about the 4% of federal funding. As we've talked about, I'm here in Boston. We have the Dana-Farber Cancer Center. We have what's known as the Jimmy Fund, right, which is a very popular childhood cancer fundraising vehicle, right? It's associated with the Boston Red Sox, and they raise millions of dollars. But at the end of the day, to your point, it's really just such a small amount, and people kind of, I think, move in and out of that, right? So they're very passionate about maybe the Jimmy Fund, but then maybe next year you're impassioned about something else because it's not affecting you personally, right?
Right.
So to me, that's where the federal funding really has to come in to offset the idea that donors come and go, right?
Yeah.
I may donate to the Jimmy Fund one year, but not the next year or never again, right?
Right.
Especially if I'm not personally impacted. I may go to a Red Sox game, see it on the wall, and say, "Oh, that's a really good thing for me to donate to," but I
Right.
may only do that once, and that's it. So you
Right.
can't rely on the philanthropic community, can you?
Right. Or the caregiver community
Right.
as well. And I think that's a really interesting point too. And I think with children's diseases, the other part is it's really hard. It's really hard to see
Hmm.
pictures of children with cancer. It's really hard
Yeah,
to
heartbreaking. Yeah.
tap into that, right? So I completely understand that for a lot of people, they want to tap out of it. Like
Right.
it's not central to their lives.
Hmm.
It's not something that's impacted them. Of course, if they know someone that's going through something, they're going to support, but it's not something that you want to delve into because there's
Right.
so much pain associated with that.
Right.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of
It's not like writing a check to something
right.
something else. Childhood cancer it's serious stuff, right? I
Yeah,
don't need to tell
exactly.
you that. Yeah. You
Exactly.
have been so focused on impact and innovation throughout your career. And the work that you're doing now to advocate not just for Amara, but for everyone who has an OMAS diagnosis. Um, how have you continued to kind of balance your professional mission and the blend, I guess, Bhavna, in what you're doing, how you're driving social impact, positive change? I stand in awe of folks like you and your husband who are still maintaining this very vibrant and meaningful sort of work that you're doing outside of Amara, which is probably capable of taking all of your time. Like
Mhm.
I stand in awe of what you're doing, and I'm just so curious as to and you said you're not good at self-care and a few other things, but I'm just like, I'm still trying to figure out how you do it.
Yeah, I'm also trying to still figure out how I'm doing it. Because at any given moment in time, I feel like I'm only at like 50% capacity on any domain of my life,
Yeah, I get it.
professionally, personally, as a mom, as an advocate. I think one of the things for me, it's taking me a while, but I'm starting to now include my role as an advocate for childhood cancers and rare diseases in my professional bios.
Yeah, you're kind of finding this intersection, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
because I think now, I mean, there's a lot of reasons throughout my life why I've been passionate about social impact and
Mm,
public health and kind of, this population level solutions finding. But I think now it's extremely personal, and
yeah.
it's going to drive me even more
Mm,
to advocate for a society that really thinks about, like in every profession, thinking about the impact of your work on society in some way, right?
right.
Every
Right.
every person, every job, you can kind of map out a pathway to some sort of societal issue that it touches in some way,
Hmm.
if you dig deep enough. And I think the role that I have right now is in advocating for a mindset towards societal impact for MBA students, which are essentially our future business leaders.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I think it's really important that business starts to see themselves as an avenue for change and improvement of society as well, and protection of society in a way.
Sure. Yeah. It's
And
not
so
just up to those that are like you and I with MPH degrees. We
right,
need business in
exactly.
there as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
any sector has a
Hmm.
responsibility, if they're
Right.
taking society in terms of resources, to give back as well, right? So I think now I'm trying to figure out how to weave the story and into my narrative of,
Mm,
this advocacy, this social impact. Social justice is a very polarized word, but in a way, like bringing to the forefront this idea that there's a responsibility that each of us have
sure.
to improving society in whatever corner makes sense to us.
Sure.
So that's one way, I think, is just kind of trying to recognize that, this is making me who I am, and
Yeah.
um, emphasizing my passions for my job as well.
I always tend to go back, Bhavna, to for me as a public health professional, to the equity and access question,
Mhm.
right? And thank God you and your husband were in a position where you had access, right? And you weren't in an EJ situation or something that required you to not have the access or the equity or what have you. So to me, I always go back to what are we doing, to your point, across all sectors, business, medicine, nonprofit, social, whatever, to just improve that equity and access
Right.
across the board, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
access not just to services, but access to knowledge too, right? So in
Absolutely.
our
Democratization of knowledge, for
right.
sure. Yeah.
In our
Yeah.
case, I mean, we have a specialist at CHLA, we have an oncologist in UCLA, a rheumatologist, pediatric rheumatologist, a pediatric neurologist, we have a behavioral therapist. Like we have a whole team of providers that have come together. And a lot of times, I mean, they're communicating, which is fantastic, but we're also communicating on their behalf
Right.
and keeping track. And I think, it's something that I've thought about all the time, is that I have the capacity, I have had the access. I mean, I
Yes.
work at UCLA, we have UCLA insurance,
Right.
we've been able to access the top professionals in this field.
Sure.
But
Just by virtue of the fact of where you're located, too.
right.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest
Yeah.
barrier in OMAS cases, is that a lot of families are located somewhere where no one's even heard of OMAS. So how
Right.
do they even begin to diagnose? And so we've been, Mike has put together through OMS Life Foundation a list of providers that have
Yeah.
some experience on OMS,
Yeah.
things like that. But I think the equity and access piece is what drove me into public health. It's what driven me into kind of this merger of business and public health, of social
Hmm.
impact.
Hmm.
And I think now more than ever, it's this idea of like, navigating insurance, navigating medical bills, navigating all of that is just so complex that I was not working for 6 months after Amara got
Yeah.
sick.
Just
And I,
handling all of it. Yeah.
just on FMLA, and then came back to my job part-time, and then quickly came back full-time. But then now it's still a full-time job
Sure.
working through all of that,
Yeah.
So there has to be more groups and just work, and to just clarify that and simplify that
I agree. Yeah.
yeah.
People might think that your answer to this question is going to be obvious, but as you think about Amara and her future, what are you most hopeful for her? And what do you think is required, I guess, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, but the advancement and the supports that are necessary for just not Amara, but every family affected with OMAS. I'm curious as to, what are you most hopeful for Amara? What do you hope for her the most?
I think for Amara, what I hope the most is that she can soar with wings as if she never had anything at all happen
Yeah,
to her,
that's amazing.
but also that she knows what happened to her and
Yeah,
is confident in the resilience that that's created for her. I mean,
absolutely.
what
She's a
I
warrior. Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
warrior. And not just that, I mean, I think for me, the unexpected thing going through this is, people would say all the time to me and my husband that, oh, you're such good advocates for your child,
Mhm.
which to me was surprising because which parent wouldn't want to be an
Sure.
advocate,
Of course. Yeah.
right?
Of
And so
course.
I didn't really understand what that means. For me, it was like it was Amara that guided me through the whole thing. I mean,
Mm.
even when she was sick, she had so much resilience, so much strength, so much positivity that showed up for
Hmm.
us. I hope she never loses that spark, as she gets older. And I hope that she just wants to stay involved and is motivated to advocate for something that she's passionate about in the future, whatever that might be.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that answer. I love that. We have been speaking with Bhavna Dias, social innovator, impact person, advocate, mom, caregiver, public health professional. You have many, many hats, many, many talents. Thank you for taking some time today to tell us your story and Amara's story and just continuing to drive people's awareness towards OMAS and all the advocacy work that you are doing. Thank you once again, and we wish you and your husband and Amara nothing but the best.
Of course. Thank you so much, Richard, for your time.